$6.5 billion worth of advanced warplanes has quietly entered the equation, and this is not just another routine military update.
Reports suggest these aircraft were delivered rapidly within weeks, and that alone is raising serious concerns among defense analysts.
Because this is not just about adding more aircraft, it is about introducing entirely new capabilities into an already tense region.
Capabilities that could potentially interfere with radar systems and change how aerial dominance is maintained.
And if that happens even briefly, it can create moments of uncertainty that are extremely difficult to manage in real time.
Satellite imagery from late March 2026 began revealing unusual activity across multiple airbases.
What initially appeared to be routine deployment quickly turned into something much more significant.
Because officials started to understand the scale, speed, and strategic impact of what they were seeing.
And that is when this situation shifted from observation to serious concern. Because this was no longer just a routine military update. It was something that could reshape expectations.
His home. For decades, U.S. air superiority has relied on the ability to detect and track threats in real time across
But that advantage depends entirely on stable systems, working without interruption or distortion.
Because even a small disruption in detection can create confusion at critical moments during high-speed decision-making.
And that is exactly where advanced electronic warfare capabilities begin to change the equation. Because if radar visibility is compromised even for a few seconds, it can affect how threats are identified and responded to. This is not just a technical issue. It represents a strategic challenge to systems that depend on precision and timing. Because when multiple systems begin to lose clarity, and the entire chain of command decisions becomes more complex. And this raises deeper concerns about how existing defense networks would respond under sustained interference conditions. Because this is no longer just about individual aircraft, it is about the systems that connect them.
And that is where this situation begins to expand beyond a single region into something much broader.
Because what started as a regional development is now being viewed as part of a much larger strategic alignment. Reports suggest this may involve deeper coordination between major powers rather than a simple isolated transfer. Because this level of capability transfer indicates intent and planning that goes beyond routine cooperation. And when that level of coordination is combined with advanced systems, it begins to reshape how power is distributed. Because reports indicate these systems may have been delivered through carefully managed channels designed to avoid detection.
And that suggests a level of planning intended to bypass traditional monitoring systems.
Because the timing and clustering of these deliveries point toward a coordinated strategy rather than isolated events.
And beyond the aircraft themselves, there are indications of supporting systems that enable long-term operational use. Because modern air capability is not defined by platforms alone, but by the systems that connect and sustain them. And that is where the implications begin to extend beyond military hardware into broader strategic influence. Because developments like this do not just affect military balance, they also influence global defense markets and economic priorities. For decades, major defense contractors have dominated high-end military supply through established alliances and procurement systems.
But this shift suggests that alternative suppliers are positioning themselves to offer advanced systems outside traditional frameworks.
And that creates the possibility of significant revenue shifting away from established networks toward new defense partnerships. Because the true cost of these systems extends beyond initial delivery into long-term support, training, and integration. And that means operational independence in one area may still be linked to external dependencies in another. Because as these systems integrate, they begin to reshape alliances and influence how countries align strategically. And this is where the balance of influence begins to shift from a single dominant structure, because modern defense is no longer defined by isolated capabilities, but by integrated systems working across domains. And that brings us to the next critical question about how these systems will actually perform in real conditions.
Because acquiring advanced systems is only the first step, and real capability depends on how effectively they are integrated.
Training pilots to operate these systems at full potential requires time precision and extensive coordination. Because these platforms are designed to function within highly sophisticated networks that must be fully synchronized. And without complete integration, the full electronic warfare capabilities of these systems may not be immediately realized. Sustaining these aircraft over time requires continuous access to spare parts, technical expertise, and operational support.
And under existing constraints, maintaining these supply chains presents its own set of challenges.
Because long-term effectiveness depends not only on equipment, but also on the sustainability of the systems behind it.
And that raises the question of how quickly these systems can transition from delivery to full operational use.
Because real-world effectiveness is measured not by presence, but by performance under dynamic conditions.
And that brings the focus toward what happens next as this situation continues to develop.
Because the next phase is not about announcements, but about measurable indicators of capability in real time. Analysts are now watching closely for specific signals that indicate whether these systems are becoming operational.
One of the first indicators will be visible training exercises, showing pilots adapting to these advanced systems. Another key signal will be coordinated flight activity, demonstrating integration between aircraft and command networks.
And more importantly, observers will look for signs of electronic disruption within monitored airspace. Even small irregularities in radar behavior could indicate that these systems are beginning to function as intended.
And if those indicators appear consistently, it could confirm a shift from potential capability to active deployment.
But if integration challenges persist, then this may remain more of a strategic signal rather than a fully realized. And that uncertainty is what makes this situation particularly important to watch in the coming months. Because what happens next will determine whether this becomes a turning point or simply another moment in an evolving pattern. Because moments like this are rarely defined by a single event, but by what they begin to represent over time.
For decades, the structure of power in this region followed a predictable pattern that many believed would remain unchanged.
But now that assumption is being tested, not suddenly, but in ways that are difficult to fully measure in the moment.
Because when new capabilities are introduced, the boundaries of what is considered possible begin to expand. And this suggests a movement toward a more complex and less predictable global structure. Because changes like this do not always appear dramatic at first, but their long-term impact can be significant. And the real question is not just what has happened, but what direction this may lead in the months ahead. Because uncertainty at this scale creates conditions where even small developments can have wider consequences.
Even. And that is why this moment is being closely watched across multiple regions and institutions.
Because whether this becomes a defining shift or not will depend entirely on what happens next.
And at this point, the outcome is not fully clear, but the implications are already being considered at the highest levels.
Because developments like this often signal the beginning of larger patterns rather than isolated events. And those patterns can reshape expectations faster than many anticipate.
Which brings us back to the central question of whether this is a temporary shift or something more permanent.
Because the answer to that question may define how this situation is remembered in the future.